This is a 24 valve Cummins engine. As you can see how narrow this guy is and how long it is. That was exactly the problem I was talking about with the cooling stack. You really need a custom fan shroud to go up in this area here for the fan to work, but the problem with that Hey guys, welcome back to another vlog. Appreciate you guys watching as always. So on this episode, we got something cool going on here. It is the Duramax versus Cummins conversion. I'm gonna break it down for you as far as complete unbiased differences between the two. You always have the Duramax guys in one corner, the Cummins guys in another corner, and it's like that old Ford versus Chevy battle going down. It's kind of happening again. Both are phenomenal engines. I'll definitely get into that, break it all down and why I would choose one over the other for specific scenarios. And there's also a lot of rumors out on the internet from self-proclaimed experts in the industry. None of them have done conversions on either one, or they try to specify, like focus in on one aspect and not the other without a true understanding of both. So we'll break all that stuff down. But before we get into that, we've got a candidate behind me, which is the Cummins with the Allison transmission. Let's go ahead and jump underneath and take a look at it. Okay, so I'm underneath this truck. It's a 998 Humvee with the Cummins engine as well as the Allison 1000 transmission. And he is in here for a Duramax swap. He wants to swap out the engine for a Duramax engine as well as the Allison transmission. Let's get into why he's going to be doing that. Now, let me back up here first and foremost. If you're going to do a swap with the Cummins, 100% go with the Allison. That's the only way to go because it can handle the torque that the Cummins puts out, and it also has that fifth and sixth gear if you're considering like the 4L80. But with that added 2 gears, it really helps out on highway speeds. Otherwise, you're still stuck at like 65 miles an hour with the 4L80 in there if that's what you're going to be running. So you're really not benefiting a whole lot out of it. So this is really like what's putting the power to the ground, and it's often one of the most overlooked parts of the powertrain. Everybody focuses in on the Cummins or the Duramax, but it really comes down to how it transfers that power to the ground, and that's where the Allison 1000 comes in. Hands down, it is the best transmission in the industry. I would say very few people would ever try to argue that it isn't. So this is a setup to go with. Now, the Cummins, on the other hand, is a phenomenal engine, and I'll break down why you'd want to do a Cummins in a minute once we get the truck back down on the ground. But I wanted to show you the Allison transmission behind it. It does fit. It fits very well behind the Cummins. As you can see here, if you take a look up here, this is a Cummins. This is one of the problems that you have with the Cummins, is it's such a long engine. It's an inline 6-cylinder engine. So because everything is lined up, you have each cylinder in the line, it has to extend this engine out so it's extremely long. Versus a V8 design, which is, imagine you got 8 cylinders here in a V8 pattern like this, it staggers it, actually fits in a much shorter area, and it doesn't come into play with the fan shroud as well as a whole cooling stack. That's one of the huge issues on the Cummins, is it's so long, it just doesn't fit. So it's literally getting a Sawzall out and just start hacking away at stuff. So we've got fan shrouds, custom fan shrouds to make it fit, but I do like to keep it as stock as possible, keep the factory fan shroud in there. So if you do have to replace it, you're not having to call us. You could probably just order 3M General if they have them in stock. So that's one of the huge issues, just fitment wise. It does not fit inside this engine bay. This engine bay was designed for a V8 engine, a lot wider, where this is a lot narrower and a lot longer. So that's one of the big issues, because then you're going to have to counteract the cooling system and make sure that cooling system is on par to handle that, because you have to do something in the front end to make this thing fit. You're also slamming it up against the firewall back here, and then the engine cover. So a lot of times you have to do some modifications back up in here. We did not do this conversion. Overall, there's a lot of money spent on this, and they did probably a pretty decent job on it. There's a couple of things that look a little off, but very, very few, and that's really kind of nitpicking it. But otherwise, it's a really solid conversion. I definitely dig it. It's just like the exhaust routing on the top of the engine, as well as the top of the tranny. I would not have done that. It's just way too tight, and it's actually touching the body. But overall, really good job. So let's go ahead and drop it down and then show you the rest of the engine and then talk about the differences between the two. So we got the truck down on the ground. Let's jump up here and take a look at it and show you the engine bay. This is a 24 valve Cummins engine. As you can see how narrow this guy is and how long it is. That was exactly the problem I was talking about with the cooling stack. You really need a custom fan shroud to go up in this area here for the fan to work, but the problem with that is it then runs into the cross member down there when it's properly placed in the correct location. So that means you really have to cut down the fan quite a bit. There's a lot of inherent problems in making this thing fit properly in here. So your next option is, well, what if I cut into the body back there? Really don't want to do that either, and then you're pushing the whole drivetrain back. So that's a huge problem with the Cummins. Now we've overcome that. The whole fan shroud down here, we changed the radiator stack. It actually tilts up a little bit more. The downside to it is we go from a 2-inch body lift, which is standard on all Duramax engine conversions, as well as the Alpha Hummer from AM General, to a 3-inch body lift. And that gives us a more vertical cooling stack. And that gives us the advantage of getting a larger fan in there as well. As you can see here, this is a problem, and a big problem. So fortunately he's from Canada, so his truck's probably not running that hot, but he's got electric fans in here. And so anybody who's looking, you can't really see it, there's also some batteries down there, but anybody who's considered putting electric fans on there, there's really no way you can properly do it. If you do keep temps kind of halfway in line, it's because you're really not working the truck hard, or you're not running in a warmer state like Texas or Southern California. There's absolutely no way to get electric fans in there unless you go with this. There's one alternative, it's a massive electric fan. However, we've researched it, and it really draws a lot of space down there that it just doesn't make sense yet. So once motors get a little bit smaller, I think it could become effective, but right now there's just nothing out there that'll keep a diesel engine cool and cooled properly. So that's one of the biggest problems with this. Now the advantage with the Cummins is, in my opinion, if I'm going to convert a truck into either a Duramax or a Cummins, it's going to be for potentially two purposes. One is it's an overseas truck, meaning it's going to go to, say, Africa. I'm going to travel around the world with it, which in fact we had one customer do, and we built him a Cummins converted truck. Reason we pushed him into the Cummins was because of the availability of parts. So virtually anywhere in the world you can find Cummins parts. The Cummins engine is a phenomenal engine. It is one of the toughest engines out there. It's almost bulletproof. And so if there is a situation and you're in the middle of, I don't know, somewhere in Africa, and you need to get parts, you could potentially find a Cummins truck, buy it off that guy, grab the parts you need to, and get it back on the road. So that's one of the huge advantages with the Cummins, where the Duramax doesn't have that. Duramax is primarily a US based platform. So a little background on this Duramax engine: it was originally designed by Isuzu and is a joint partnership with GM, and eventually GM became owners, or full ownership, of that Duramax engine platform, and have been manufacturing it in the US since day one, but now they fully own it. But technology did come from Isuzu, which is a phenomenal company, a lot of technology in the engine. It's a phenomenal engine on its own, but getting the parts for it in, Africa, overseas somewhere, I could see that as being a problem. So that's why the Cummins does really well. Now, you're gonna have people say, yeah, the Cummins is stronger. It's debatable. It is a heavier block. You could argue both ways. Initially, the Cummins, where it was like, oh, when it hits 1 million miles, that's when you overhaul the top end. Now Duramaxes are coming in line with those because they have the track record of being out there in the marketplace for quite a few years, where we are seeing 500,000 miles to 1 million miles out of them. Now there are weak links to the Duramax, as there are with the Cummins. One of the biggest issues with the Cummins was a fuel supply system. And there was a pump called a P pump that was hands down the best out in the industry, and that's why a lot of people would convert their Cummins over to the P pump. However, there's so many little details and nuances about both the Duramax and Cummins. I don't really want to spend the entire vlog talking about those. But the Cummins, to get it on par with the Duramax, you got to do a couple things. First and foremost is the cooling stack. It has to be dialed. It has to be proper. It has to have the Allison 1000 6-speed transmission behind it. That is absolutely a must, because that's going to handle the power. And then finally, I would highly recommend changing out the differentials, changing out the gear set so you can drop that RPM by 300 or so RPM. The problem with this Cummins is it develops so much low-end torque, which is a good thing in most applications. However, for this truck, highway speeds, it does limit your top end speed. So I think on one of the last vlogs we were talking about the stretch seating, the green truck that we're getting prepped for paint. That one we changed out to, we did all of that, the cooling stack, the Cummins with the Allison transmission, but we also did the front and rear diffs, changed out the gearing on there. It dropped it, I think it was like 300 from my recollection, and that was like, shoot, 6-7 years ago that we did it. But it was substantial, where you could get out on the highway and just cruise that thing at 85 miles an hour. You hit the trail, and it has a ton of torque on the trail, and it keeps that lower RPM. We just kind of crawl up and over rocks. So amazing setup on that truck. I want to take you over to the Duramax that Dee's working on over here, show you that cooling stack and show you how it is different. The angle is different. The whole cooling stack's completely different. So let's go over there. We'll talk about the Duramax. Over here with Dee, Dee's finishing up a conversion right now, finishing up the electrical on a conversion, and crimping some supply lines for
alternator wire.
Alternator. All right, cool. So we're sitting here on a fresh Duramax conversion. As you can see, it's completely different. It's a lot tighter, and it does look a lot tighter because it's that V8 design. The engine comes out here and over there, so obviously there's a little bit more mass up in the front, and it gives us a lot more room here in this area for the fan. You've got a proper fan on it, the factory fan shroud. We've got a custom aluminum radiator, the intercooler, as well as the rest of the cooling stack. We do throw an electric fan on the top, which really aids in stop and go traffic, as well as for air conditioning. So you get that stop and go traffic, you get a lot of heat that radiates through the cooling stack, and it comes up and hits that AC condenser. So that's a huge little bonus there, is getting that fan on there. We also have the transmission cooler remote mounted in the back. That gives you a thinner cooling stack and less heat up here, so it can really focus on keeping the engine temps down. So getting into the Duramax, both I feel are phenomenal engines. In the past, you'd have to almost argue that the Duramax was as strong as a Cummins. And the reason for that is because the Cummins had the track record that many years. I think it was in the late 80s when it came out, and the platform is, for the most part, went unchanged for quite a few years. So it had a huge uphill battle to overcome going up against the Cummins. So there's no knocking the Cummins. This engine though is extremely strong. This Duramax engine is extremely strong and robust, and I wouldn't hesitate running this up against the Cummins any day of the week as far as longevity goes. As long as you're not adding 1,000 horsepower. You add 1,000 horsepower to anything, it's gonna detonate on you eventually. So with the V8 design engine, it just runs a lot smoother. It's a much more balanced engine, so it doesn't have that vibration. Plus the common rail fuel supply, it means you're running it at, I think it's 24,000 PSI, extremely high pressure. It also adds to a very smooth running engine. But by doing that and having the technology that's in this Duramax engine, this platform runs very efficient. And that's why we're seeing anywhere from 16 on the low side all the way up to a couple guys with, like, if this setup right here with the stock GSA tires, he'd probably get around 20, 21 miles per gallon on the conservative side. If he wasn't driving with his foot in it, it would get really good fuel economy. The Cummins just doesn't get that. Then it also comes mated with the Allison, the computer systems work together. The Cummins does not. So you have to do adapter plates in between the engine as well as transmission. With the communication on this engine, you have an ECM, engine control module, and then also a TCM, transmission control module. They work together seamlessly, and I got the ECM and TCM right over there. Let me come around and I'll show those to you. All right, so coming around over here, you've got the ECM right here, that controls the engine, as well as the TCM down here. Now this is, again, we're wrapping this conversion up, so don't mind the wires. This is all gonna be cleaned up and wrapped up here. And we have a custom mount for this guy as well for the TCM. But this is what communicates and controls both the engine and transmission and adapts to the driver and takes in all of those different signal inputs and really makes it just a fun driving car where it puts out 500 horsepower or so, 1,000 foot-pounds of torque, just stock from us, and you can go up from there. But at that level, it's just extremely fast. And I think the max, the peak torque output is around 1950 or so. I'm probably off by like 100 or so RPM, where the Cummins is much lower. I wanna say that was 1100 RPM. So what that means is that's the max amount of power you're gonna get is at 1100 RPM or at 1900 RPM. So where this is still building and building and building up to 1900 RPM, the Cummins hits that super early and then it starts to fade off. So that's where you kind of want to drive in that peak torque range, ideally, and get that, that gear set changed out on the Cummins so that you can drop the RPMs and get a higher top end speed out of the truck. So that's kind of a brief overview of the two, the Cummins conversion as well as the Duramax. And in this situation, we actually have two trucks in here right now. One that we did previously 7 years ago or so on the Cummins. We're switching it out to a Duramax with the Allison, as well as that customer over there. We're taking out his Cummins and putting in the Duramax. All right, so there's a quick breakdown of the Cummins versus the Duramax, and I hope I didn't sound biased, because I'm really not biased on the engines. There are specific platforms where the Cummins is far superior than the Duramax. However, in my opinion, in this platform, fit and finish, drivability, the Duramax is a hands down winner, and it's also a testament with customer outside on the green truck as well as this truck coming in to swap out the Cummins for the Duramax. We'll definitely be happy to work with you on both platforms and do both, but the Cummins is probably not the best choice for most people. It's a very specific person. Also, we're gonna be doing quite a few vlogs on this truck, doing the conversion from the Cummins over to the Duramax. So make sure you stay tuned for those. Thanks for watching. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. See you soon.
What about the bell?
Hey, hit the bell. I still haven't seen the bell, but it's there somewhere. Apparently.
It's right, like there, somewhere, right there.
I don't see it.